guys quieted down already. You knew we were about to start. So welcome and thank you for coming, teachers and students. This is the first event of our 2019 Spring Making a Difference Speaker Series. And we're going to kick off the speaker series with a presentation from Dr. Godar, who's here to talk about the Holocaust and his family history. And let's give him a round of applause.
Hello everybody and good morning. My name is Glenn Godar. Today I'll be sharing a story about my father, Fritz Golderweiter. Later on in the story you'll see how the Golderweiter name was changed to Godar. I call my story a full circle because my father, in 1938, fled Vienna, Austria, with most of my family. They emigrated to New York City, and my father was drafted by the U.S. Army, sent to Italy to serve in World War II, and ended up the war back in Vienna, full circle. I spent all my years in Ridgewood. I went to Ridgewood schools and graduated Ridgewood High School in 1969. I went through from Ridgewood High School, I went on to get for college and then on to dental school. I had dental practice in Ridgewood for 35 years. My wife and I still live in Ridgewood in the house that I grew up in. Our two sons have graduated college. Our older son is back at MIT studying for his PhD in engineering. Our younger son is in California working for a fintech company. My family moved to Ridgewood in 1951. How they got here this will be my story. The three families that I did talk about to set the stage correctly. The first family is that of Peter and Emma Golderweiter. In the late 1800s, they had 9 children. One of those children was named Marcel, and he went on to become my father's dad. The second family is that of my mother's father, the Gottlieb family. They had 5 children, also in the late 1800s. Pointer, actually. This is Mama Rosa. This is Berta, Leo, Mitzi, Max, and Heinrich. Leo would go on to become my mother's father. Mitzi would go on to become my father's mother. This sounds a little bit confusing. It is because my parents were first cousins. Leo and Heinrich, they later on bought a bank, became very successful and very, very wealthy. The third family is that of my mother's mom, Julianne. Julianne Baer married my mother's father, Leo Gottlieb. Julianne's parents, Elizabeth and Herman Baer, they later on they had a very tragic death, and you'll learn about that later on in the story. In 1903, Marcel joined the Landwehr Infantry Army, which was a reserve army of the Austrian government. It was a territorial army of the Habsburg Empire, and they were basically hoping never to fight a war. In 1909, Marcel Golderweiter married Mitzi Gottlieb. In 1918, Julianne Baer married Leo Gottlieb. In May of 1912, my father's sister, Hedda, was born. Notice how Marcel is still dressed in his uniform. This picture was probably taken 2 months prior to World War I starting. June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were assassinated in Sarajevo, Austria. Franz Ferdinand was the heir apparent to the Austrian-Hungarian throne of the Habsburg dynasty. World War I was an accident ready to happen. Austria-Hungary was very shocked and threatened by the big victory by Serbia in the Balkan Wars in 1913. Germany was trying to settle scores with Russia and the United Kingdom. With Austria-Hungary eager to attack Serbia, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand was either a cause, an excuse, or possibly even a setup to the war. Nonetheless, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Shortly thereafter, Germany attacked Russia, and then Germany attacked France and Belgium. World War I was officially started. Prior to the war, Italy had aligned themselves with Germany and Austria as the central powers. Russia, France, and the United Kingdom were the allies. When the war broke out, though, Italy decided to stay neutral. In 1915, Italy joined allies against Germany and Austria. In December of 1914, Marcel Golderweiter was employed in Pola, Austria, And this was one of Austria's two major naval bases in the Adriatic on the Eastern Front. Later on, Poland would be named Pula, Croatia. The Adriatic was a major focus in Pola, the chief area for Italy and Austria's war at sea. And here you can see, on the lower left, we know that picture was taken in 1915, because when Italy joined the war, the only form of air power were the dirigibles, which are the air balloons. And here, an Austrian naval ship had shot one down in the Bay of Pola, and this was a picture that Marcel had taken while he was stationed over there. On the top right, you see Marcel standing in one of the trenches, many trenches of World War I. World War I was known for trench warfare. World War I also saw the wide use of chemical warfare and poison gas. The trenches were thought to offer some degree of protection against exposure. However, the soldiers were under nearly constant bombardment, and unfortunately, the trenches caused something called shell shock. Today, we would call that PTSD. This is a postcard that Marcel sent to Mitzi. And you can see the date. It was September 16, 1914. In that postcard, you can see a Russian plane dropping bombs on the German and Austrian soldiers. It was probably one of the earliest times that an airplane was used in a war. This picture is very, very important. If these five men didn't exist, World War II may never have started, and if it did, it may have been a very short war. Karl Duisberg headed the company Bayer. Karl Bosch headed the company BASF. William Perkin, William Oswald, and Fritz Haber were famous chemical scientists. In 1856, William Perkin was doing an experiment in his lab. He was an English scientist, and by accident he discovered the permanent dye color purple. He named it mauve. It was such a huge discovery that all the German chemical companies decided to immediately go into production and produce this dye. The color purple at that time was a favorite color of royalty and wealthy people. And so everybody went into full-blown production. Shortly thereafter, they discovered indigo blue, another permanent dye. Karl Duisberg of Bayer decided to branch out a little bit and developed the Bayer aspirin in 1863. In 1898, they developed heroin. Heroin was a very powerful painkiller in 1898. In the late 1800s, the worldwide sources of nitrogen were depleted because of the saltpeter war in South America. The nitrogen used for fertilizer was in the form of bird droppings called guano, and that came from South America, and saltpeter also came from South America, and that was used for gunpowder. By 1915, the Germans almost completely ran out of gunpowder. So they took a byproduct of the dye industry, which was chlorine gas, and in a famous event in 1915, the Germans took 5,000 canisters of chlorine gas, and they opened up the canisters when the wind was blowing toward the French and the British soldiers, and they ran away in the opposite direction. Thousands and thousands of British and French soldiers were killed and were permanently blinded. At the same time, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch were developing a technique where they took nitrogen out of the air, hydrogen from coal tar, and were able to make a liquid ammonia. That liquid ammonia was immediately a pure source of nitrogen for fertilizer, but also was very important because with a technique from William Oswald, a German scientist, they were able to, under very high pressure, make nitric acid. And from the nitric acid, they were able to very quickly make pure ammonium nitrate, which was a very, very powerful explosive. So the German chemical companies immediately went into full production to make explosives. They needed a lot of labor, though. So the first thing they did is they took 50,000 prisoners from the Western Front, and they brought them back to Germany and used them for slave labor. And this was probably one of the first times slave labor was used in a modern war. On November 21st, 1916, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, the longest reigning emperor, passed away. There was no direct heir to the throne, so they had to go to his great nephew, Karl I, to take over. Karl barely kept the monarchy alive for the next 2 years. So September 22nd, 1917, my father Fritz Golderweiter was born. Obviously, Marcel had made some trips back to Vienna during the war. October 19, 1917, Leo Gottlieb, he joined the Imperial and Royal Aviation Troops, and probably, they had very few planes, so maybe he was also involved with the dirigibles as well, I'm not sure. But anyway, he only served for one more year, so the war was over very shortly after. The United States resisted going to war. However, starting with the sinking of the passenger ship Lusitania on May 17, 1915, and then repeated sinkings by the German U-boats, President Wilson had no choice. So he had a very famous war message to Congress on April 2nd, 1917, and by April 6th, the United States had formally entered the war and sent over 2 million soldiers to the Western Front. At the 11th hour, 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, World War I ended. It was one of the bloodiest wars in world history. Over 16 million people were military and civilian deaths, and 20 million wounded. These are medals that Marcel came back with from the war. About 6 months later, on June 28, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles and its sister treaties dismembered the old Austrian-Hungarian and German empires. Germany lost a lot of land to Poland, and this, one could say that this being the impetus for Adolf Hitler going to war. 1919 was a very significant year, as you'll soon see. In 1919, the inflation went rampant in Austria. The cost of living increased 700 times between 1919 and 1923. In 1922, late 1922, Austria had to do some drastic measures and bring it to a screeching halt. The first thing they did was end food subsidies. They fired 70,000 people from the Austrian government. They created a new Austrian shilling. And they also put restrictions on the government's ability to print more money. They also then went back on the gold standard in 1925. The inflation came to a screeching halt, and people instantaneously started to feel better in Austria. 1919 again was a big year. In 1919, the German Workers' Party was founded. It was an anti-Semitic, anti-Versailles group of people that banded together to form this party. A year later, they added the word National Socialist to the name to become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which we would call the Nazi Party. That's how they called it. That was the name of the Nazi Party when it first started. A year later, 1921, Hitler had been a public speaker, and he was made the leader and Führer of the party. 2 years later, Hitler felt he was becoming more powerful. So on November 8th, November 9th, he and some of the Nazi Party followers, there was something called a beer hall push, where he tried to overtake the government in Bavaria. It was a total failure for Hitler. He was arrested along with a dozen other of his followers. And here is Hitler with his defendants. They were tried on February 26, 1924, and then sentenced to 5 years in prison, beginning their sentence on April 1st. Back in Austria, things were doing better. This is the Golderweiter family going to Kitzbühel, one of the lakes. On the top here is my father Fritz Golderweiter, his sister Hedda, and his mother Mitzi Gottlieb Golderweiter. In October of 1924, my mother Suzanne was born to Leo and Julianne Gottlieb. Her brother Carl was born in November of 1926. Carl would go on to become very severely mentally and physically handicapped, confined to the second floor of their home, never really to be seen for most of his life, and eventually was put into a special home for Jewish children. If I mentioned the three families that I talked about earlier, all three families were Jewish. Assisted by his deputy Rudolf Hess, going back to Germany, Hitler produced the first volume of his political autobiography, Mein Kampf. This was an anti-Versailles, anti-Semitic treatise. It was based on Arianism, about racial purity, anti-Semitism, and Lebensraum. He promised the German people to get a more living space because he was really upset with the fact that with the Versailles Versailles Treaty, a lot of land was taken away. So he didn't only want that land back, but he wanted more land so that the German people could spread out. The German chemical companies, at the end of World War I, were totally devastated. Their factories were destroyed, they were forced to give up their patents to the entire world, and they struggled to really figure out a way to go back into business. So Carl Duisberg of Bayer and Carl Bosch of, this is Carl Duisberg of Bayer and Carl Bosch of BASF. They worked together to bring 5 chemical companies together: ACFA, BASF, Bayer, Casella, Cox, and Cal. They brought them together to form IG Farben. IG Farben became the largest conglomerate company in the world at the time. This company became the engine and the fuel behind Hitler's war machine, and IG Farben also aided in the pursuit of Hermann Göring's 4-year plan, which was make Germany self-sufficient in a 4-year period later on in the 1930s. IG Farben also helped Hitler promote the elimination of Jewish influence in the Austrian industry. Marcel Goldreiter took a job with, in the mid-1920s, took a job with Credit Anstalt. Credit Anstalt was the oldest bank in Austria, and it was owned by the Rothschild family. The Rothschild family also owned the largest chemical plant in Austria called Skoda Berger Wetzlar, and this chemical plant was long sought after by IG Farben. In the mid-1920s, Leo and Heinrich Gottlieb, they bought a bank, a very old bank that was founded in 1884. It was called Brüel & Kalmus. They immediately transformed the bank into a 1928. This is probably the last picture that was taken of Carl. My mother's still living, but she really doesn't talk much about it, and so she's not sure why, but he was really never seen. He was probably confined to the 2nd floor of their house. Here, my mother Suzanne is standing with her grandparents, Elizabeth and Herman Baer. We talked about them earlier, and you hear about them more later, but they suffered a very tragic death at the end of during World War II. One of our family cousins, Liesl Goldreiter, she won the title of Miss Austria in 1929. She, along with all the other beauty queens of Europe, traveled to Texas to compete in a Miss Universe pageant. Liesl was voted the first non-American Miss Universe by unanimous decision of the jury. That was unusual that she was the first non-American, but she was also Jewish, and that was significant at that time. Liesl went back to Vienna, barely escaped the Holocaust, but her family was not so lucky. The entire family of her family perished during the Holocaust. Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, this was called Black Tuesday. This was the official day of the stock market crash. It actually followed 2 very steep declines on Wall Street. And on this Tuesday, billions of dollars were lost, wiping out thousands of investors. Also, many small banks in Europe went under, and Credit Anstalt in Austria was ordered by the government to take over some of these banks because they were not solvent. 1930, Brüel & Kalmus is doing better and better. Leo and Heinrich decided to buy a car. So Leo bought himself a DeSoto, and here you can see my father standing outside the car, and my mother inside the car, and again, remember that they were first cousins. On May 1st, 1930, because of Leo's success in the Brüel & Kalmus, he was invited to join the oldest lodge in Austria, which was a Freemason lodge. It was a prestigious event for him. Again, here's a picture of Vienna Opera House, 1930. People have a sense of wealth, and they're going out more, they're buying more cars. You can see a lot more cars in the street. And there's a little bit of false sense of security here because all of a sudden, the banks that Credit Anstalt took over during the crash, that caused the company to have a lot of financial difficulties, and Credit Anstalt collapsed in May of 1931. This triggered bank collapses around the world, and if the depression started in 1929, it really took hold in 1931 at the collapse of Credit Anstalt. 1932, Leo and Heinrich are still doing well with Brüel & Kalmus. They were not affected by the crash or the depression. They hired a very well-known architect, and they completely renovated the house. They installed an elevator on this right side probably to help Carl be moved from the upstairs to the downstairs. In 1932, this is a picture of my mother with her parents, Leo and Julianne, and behind her to her left, or at least to her right, are her grandparents, Elizabeth and Herman Baer. Again, we'll hear about them later. January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany. There were three parties in Germany. The Nazi Party was the strongest of the three, so he was made Chancellor. He only had about a third of the support of the German people, so the President of Germany decided there needed to be an election in March to confirm that he could stay on as Chancellor. I.G. Farben in the late 1920s made a huge discovery. They would discover the ability to make synthetic gasoline and synthetic rubber called Buna. This was really huge in the sense that now they could be totally self-sufficient. They actually had funding from DuPont in the United States, which later was a problem for DuPont during the 1930s. So all of a sudden, though, just as they were ready to go into production at this large plant that they made, there was a huge oil discovery in Texas and the Middle East, and then coupled with the Depression, the demand for fuel oil completely ceased. All of a sudden, I.G. Farben was in serious financial trouble, so Karl Bosch was panicking that the company might go under, so he had a great idea. He was going to meet with Adolf Hitler, and he was going to talk to Hitler about the German government subsidizing I.G. Farben and helping them go into full production. So he arranged a meeting with Hitler, so the top executives from I.G. Farben met with Hitler, and it was a very, very successful meeting for Karl Bosch. At the meeting, Hitler agreed that they were going to buy everything that I.G. Farben could produce, everything from synthetic materials, rubber, anything, all the fuel, just go into full production, and Germany would basically subsidize it. So basically they would take on, Germany would take on all the risks and buy. So at the beginning of the war, 75 to 100% of everything Germany needed, from truck, tank, aviation fuel, to high explosives, tires, aircraft engines, clothing, belt buckles, and mustard gas, to name a few, were supplied by I.G. Farben. This will be very significant as time goes on. March 5th was the election, and Nazis were successful. They achieved a 44% support of the German people. However, though, this wasn't enough for Hitler. So to reduce these opposition, Hitler's SA and SS went on a month-long campaign of violence to scare or imprison other opponents to the party. Many were placed in the first concentration camp that he opened in March 20th of the same month. So March 23rd, 1933, Hitler proposed the enabling law. It was passed immediately, almost by unanimous vote, and because of that, Hitler was now the dictator of Germany and the sole power. On July 1936, back in Austria, my father Fritz entered the university at the Vienna Business School. He stayed there for the next 4 years. Back in Germany, Hitler ordered Hermann Göring to put together the 4-year plan. August 1936, so Hermann Göring was well known in the sense that he headed the Gestapo. He created the first concentration camps, eventually turning them over to Himmler in 1934. The purpose of the 4-year plan was to rebuild German raw material industry, revitalize the German army, and create a self-sufficient Germany with synthetic materials all produced by I.G. Farben. This is in Austria. In 1938, there were 200,000 Jews living in Austria. 170,000 of the Jews, or 90%, were living in Vienna. This was significant for Hitler because on June 1937, he ordered Adolf Eichmann to organize lists of Austrian Jews. The SS had drawn up lists on index cards of the most important Jews outside the Third Reich. This is a statement of Adolf Eichmann. We sat like schoolboys on benches and copied the information onto the cards. Then they were arranged alphabetically, letter by letter, and anything that was not urgent was moved to one side. With this card index, the first wave of the SD stormed into Austria. I can be pretty assured that the Goldwiders and the Gottliebs were on those index cards. On October 2nd, 1937, Hitler ordered Eichmann to make a trip to Haifa, Palestine, as part of Hitler's plan to deport all the German Jews to colonies in Palestine to solve his Jewish problem, as he called it. Eichmann arrived in Haifa. The British government said, there's no way you're staying here. You can sightsee for one day. You got to go back to Germany. So he went back, and so the deportation of Jews not an option anymore. Adolf Eichmann became one of the most pivotal actors in the implementation of the final solution. On June 1937, General Werner von Blomberg ordered the Anschluss or armed intervention of Austria. As he said, the object of this operation, armed intervention in Austria, in the event of her restoring the monarchy, will be to compel Austria by armed force to give up a restoration. On July 3rd, 1937, my father Fritz finished his studies at the business school. July-September 1937 was a difficult time for it was a bittersweet time for the Gottliebs and the Golderbeiters. Leo and Julian Gottlieb found it very difficult to care for Carl at home anymore. He found it necessary to place him into a special care home for Jewish children. For the Golderbeiters, it was a little bit better month. Fritz graduated from business school and was ready to go out into the working force. There were no TVs, cell phones, or internet, so the people in Austria were going about business as usual, whereas in Germany they were planning for a serious change in their lives. Back in Germany, Heinrich Himmler, a politician, he commanded the SS, Hitler's elite troops, and was head of the Gestapo. He took it over from Göring. He was perhaps the most powerful and ruthless man in Nazi Germany next to Hitler. November 5th, 1937, Hitler proposed his vision for Germany. On November 5th, 1937, Hitler called a secret conference, and there he outlined his plans to acquire Lebensraum, remember, gaining more land for Germany at the expense of other nations, and the first of this was going to be the seizure of Austria. Austria had no idea that this was coming. November 19, 1937, Prime Minister Chamberlain sent Lord Halifax to meet with Hitler. Chamberlain felt sorry for Hitler that land was taken away from him during the Treaty of Versailles. So he sent Chamberlain there to basically offer his support for amending the Treaty of Versailles and remilitarizing Rhineland, which was between Germany and Belgium. I'm sure if they knew that they were annexing Austria, this meeting never would have happened. My father, on November 1937, my father Fritz, he took his internship at Brühl & Kallmus, starting his permanent position there in January of 1938. His ambition was to actually learn the business and eventually take over the business from Leo and Heinrich Gottlieb. That obviously didn't happen. So Chancellor Kirschistig of Austria, he was invited to a nice dinner with Hitler on February 12, 1938. After dinner, he served him a nice piece of Apfelstrudel, and then angrily told him to go back to Austria and put Nazis into the government. Schuschnigg agreed. He gave into that demand, went back to Austria, and reneged on his promise to Hitler. Göring was furious, so he basically demanded that Schuschnigg resign, and Schuschnigg did resign. Before doing so, though, he put all the Nazis into the government, and then also commanded that the Austrian army not resist Hitler coming into Austria. So on March 11th, Hitler and the German army walked in with their index cards, unopposed, and on 24 hours later, on March 12th, Austria was annexed by Berlin, which was called the Anschluss. All the residents of Vienna looking out their windows in the morning of March 12, 1938, they see all the Austrian police taking off their Austrian armbands and putting on the German swastika instead. For the 90% of the people that lived in Vienna, they were very happy. They wanted Hitler. Hitler had promised them they were going to have a better social environment. They were going to have be better financially, and they were very eager for the change of power. As far as the 10%, the 170,000 Jews that lived in Vienna, that was a different story. 3 days later, Hitler arrives in Vienna, March 15th. In 3 days, it was like the Macy's Day Parade. They had the entire city decked out in banners people were cheering. They had thousands and thousands of people coming out to greet him. He went to the Habsburg Palace, and it was called the Heidenplatz, and there in front of 300 to 400,000 Austrians cheering him on, he gave his vision for Germany in the next year and years to go. The very first thing that Hitler did, he was to disband all the small organizations. He sent the special SS commandos were instructed to deport political opponents and dissolve all associations, including the Freemasons. They went into the Free Lodge where Leo was a member, and they arrested everybody, and they took him out of Austria and put him into the concentration camps. Leo happened not to be there that day, and at least initially escaped that order. Now the next thing that happened is that Hitler seized all the assets of the Rothschild family. The Rothschild family, remember, owned Freddy Anstalt and the German chemical company Skoda Werke. The first thing that happened is part of the Aryanization of Austria. Marcel Goldberger was removed as director of the bank because he was Jewish. Marcel Goldberger on April 15th lost his pension because he was Jewish. On June 2nd, 1938, Skoda Werke, again owned by the Rothschild family, was turned over to I.G. Farben. I.G. Farben for many years tried to buy the bank, buy the chemical company, but now they got it basically free. I.G. Farben, this basically is helping the Goring's four-year plan, elimination of Jewish influence, and also making Germany totally self-sufficient. June 2nd, Marcel was moved as director. Also, what happened in 1938 was the development of the Austrian SS. They made their headquarters in a Hotel Metropole, and it was transformed into the Gestapo headquarters. This was the largest Gestapo office outside of Berlin, and an estimated 50,000 people were interrogated or tortured here. In Vienna, on June 30th, my father quit his job at Dueling Countess, knowing that his days were numbered in Vienna, so regretfully, he left with a letter of recommendation from his uncles. June 11th, Marcel. Every Jewish family in Vienna had to fill out an inventory. This inventory, if you had to put everything that was valuable, your homes, your cars, your jewelry, your paintings, anything of value, you had to put the value there. And they checked it. You can see all the scribble marks. They made sure that everything was accurate. And at the end of the inventory, you had to sign over all that to the German government, and that was considered a tax, which allowed you to leave Austria if you wanted to. Here's another inventory for Heinrich, and Leo also had his inventory. And on this inventory, Heinrich and Leo had submitted inventory for Ruhl and Kalmus. In this inventory, they list their personal assets of the equivalent of, back then, of $350,000. Today, that would be worth $28 to $30 million. At the end, they basically returned over all those assets to the German government. In 1938, Herman and Elizabeth Baer, this is a photograph on the left and obviously a painting on the right, and this is how they looked back then. One thing I might add, though, is in order for I.G. Farben to have secured the support of Hitler, they had agreed to turn over today's equivalent of $350 million to the Nazi Party, and that was very significant. And basically Hitler owned I.G. Farben for that donation. This is the inventory for Elizabeth and Herman Baer. And it is here that they were basically turning over their assets. On August 3rd, Leo and Julianne Gottlieb, they both got baptized. The idea was that when Hitler came into Austria, he basically made an announcement that if you did not practice a religion or you were Jewish, you were Jewish. So everybody started getting baptized, thinking that if they were baptized, they would escape his onslaught. That obviously didn't happen. And Hitler still saw that all these baptisms happening, so he took the priests and he put them into the concentration camp, the Catholic priests that were doing this. In the middle of the summer of 1938, Vienna Jews waiting outside the police station trying to get a visa. Probably only half of them received one. In August of 38, my father finally got his visas to leave Vienna. And so on August 29, 1938, my father left Vienna. Notice that he has an Austrian passport. 1 month later, all the Austrians had to turn in their Austrian passports and receive a German passport instead. My father went to Geneva, Switzerland to visit his sister Hedda, who had gone there earlier with her husband. And then my father went on to the University of Paris to study while he waited for his visa to go to the United States. These are pictures that my father took in September of 1938 in Paris. A lot less traffic then than there is now around the Triumph. Now, in September, my mother received her passport. Notice now she has a German passport. Also notice in the autumn of 1938, all Jewish passports were stamped with an identifying red letter J, indicating that she was Jewish. December 12, 1938, Ruhl and Kalmus was officially turned over to the Deutsche Bank, which that same name is the same it was called back then. Deutsche Bank basically owned Credit Anstalt. December 23rd, 1938, Leo and Julianne received their passport. Notice that they asked how many children they have. They only put one. I'm not sure why they didn't indicate Carl was a child, but he was left behind when they left Austria. So the Godley family left, minus Carl. Also, Herman and Elizabeth Baer, Julianne's parents, also stayed behind. And shortly thereafter, Elizabeth and Herman Baer were ordered by Hitler to move out of their home of 35 years, and they had to move to a Jewish district of Vienna. So most of the family left, but they left a lot of precious things behind. They left houses, they left cars, they left banks, their money, they left their jobs, they left all their money, and one thing that was really precious, obviously, Carl, my mother's brother, was left behind in a special home, as were Elizabeth and Herman Baer. The two items that were not left behind were these two chandeliers. They hung in my father's apartment in Vienna. They were put into a crate wrapped in newspapers of the day, and I found these not too long ago. And one newspaper that I found wrapped around the chandelier was from January 1st, 1939, and the translation was the year of the German regime or empire. The New Year's message was from the leader, Chancellor, aka Adolf Hitler, and this was basically the German year. By the middle of 1939, it was very hard to emigrate to the United States. On May 13, 1939, the German liner MS St. Louis sailed from Hamburg, Germany to Havana, Cuba, carrying 937 passengers, almost all Jewish refugees fleeing the Third Reich. The passengers did not have the proper papers, so Cuba, the United States, and Canada turned the ship away. The ship immediately returned to Europe. A third of the passengers died in the Holocaust. By the middle of 1939, my father received his papers to go to the United States. So on July 13, 1939, my father disembarked from France on the SS Manhattan. These are pictures that he took while en route, except for the top left one, obviously. And in the lower right is a picture that he took of Manhattan in July of 1939. My father arrived July 20th, 1939, and received his immigrant ID card. In January 1940, my father took his first apartment in New York after making enough money as a bicycle delivery boy in Manhattan. By the middle of 1940, President Roosevelt was getting very concerned when he saw were German spies that might be embedded in the Jewish refugees coming into the United States. So in a fireside chat that he gave to the American public on May 26, 1940, he issued a very stern warning to the American public. He saw this warning as a Trojan horse, the fifth column. These were spies, saboteurs, and traitors being actors in a new strategy of basically embedding themselves amongst the Jewish refugees and coming into the United States. He asked the American public to fight the war at home and basically vigilant, and if they noticed anything strange, to turn anybody into the authorities. Old posters were posted all around the country, basically asking the public to stop the fifth column. On July 13, 1940, my father was baptized into the Catholic Church. I can't imagine, but this was related to the all the talk of fifth column and him wanting to distance himself from his Jewish background. September 16, 1940, Roosevelt felt pressure to go to war and felt war was imminent, so he instituted the first peacetime draft. Every male person, if you could walk, whether you were either a legal alien or a citizen, you were required to present yourself or submit to registration. My father enlisted in the U.S. Army on January 15, 1941. About a week later, he got his first promotion. Going back to Germany, remember Karl, my mother's brother? Well, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler in Berlin signed a directive that formed the basis for the mass murder of the mentally ill by the medical profession. This basically directed terminally ill patients can be protected from the mercy of death by the most critical assessment of their state of illness. And that was his order. This led to a program called Action T4, or the euthanasia program. The purpose of this program was to kill incurably ill, physically or mentally disabled, emotionally distraught, and elderly people. Nazi ideologues believed that mentally and physically disabled persons threatened the genetic purity of the German people. Centers were set foot all over Germany and Austria. On May 23rd, 1941, Karl Gottlieb, along with 22 other children, were transported from a special care home for Jewish children to Am-Steinhof Mental Hospital in Vienna. Am-Steinhof, in 1938, following the Anschluss, was taken over by Hitler, and it was established as one of the T4 central euthanasia killing centers. This hospital was under the direction of Dr. Erwin Jekelius and Dr. Heinrich Gross. Dr. Jekelius, his job was to choose those unfit to live, and they were transported to Hartheim Castle near Linz to be gassed. Dr. Heinrich Gross, his job was the children that were not chosen to go to Hartheim Castle. He would perform medical experiments on them, and then they were euthanized in the hospital. In July and August of 1940 alone, 3,200 patients from Am-Steinhof were sent to Hartheim Castle to be gassed. A total of 18,000 patients were killed in Hartheim until the Red Cross the Catholic Church complained to Hitler that this was a very brutal way and unfair treatment of the ill. So Hitler agreed, we will stop it. So they stopped killing at Hartheim. However, behind closed doors, Dr. Heinrich Gross, they continued the killing behind closed doors at Am-Steinhof. So on May 29, 1941, Karl was placed in what they called a charitable ambulance. Charitable ambulance was named because Hitler felt he was being charitable to society because he was killing those unfit to live. So on May 29th, the charitable ambulance left Vienna, took a 2.5-hour car ride to Hartheim Castle near Linz, Austria. Upon arrival, Karl and the other passengers were taken out of the ambulance. They were walked over to the showers where they were de-iced, and then carbon monoxide was pumped in there, and they were all killed. They were taken down the courtyard, put into the crematorium, and cremated. Once a week, they would take the ashes and throw them into the Blue Danube. You can see the smoke arising. This is a picture that was taken at the time. This was Wisconsin for the 4 years of the war. 18,000 people were killed in this castle. All the people that were going to be killed were put on lists like this. This is a sample list, and Karl's name would have been on that. Also, following their death, a condolence letter was sent to the families. This condolence letter falsified the place of death and also the reason of death. Obviously, they didn't talk about exactly what happened. December 8, 1941, the United States declared war on Japan, but only after Japan declared war on us first and then bombed Pearl Harbor. On December 11, 1941, the United States declared war on Germany only after Hitler declared war in the United States as part of this pact with Mussolini and Emperor of Japan. So in 1940, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Smith Act of 1940, President Roosevelt decided that the Japanese and Jewish refugees were a threat to the American public. So on basically the day of Pearl Harbor, the day after, he declared all Japanese and Jewish refugees coming into the United States were all by law considered to be enemy aliens, and this was lasted until 1945. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, my father's division was sent over to the West Coast to protect the United States from possible air attacks from the Japanese. We were just visiting California. If we go by Muir Woods, you can see all these bunkers that were put up there to protect the United States from air attacks from the Japanese. So going back to Vienna, the week of July 28, 1942, Herman and Elizabeth were basically received their deportation notice. They were forced to pack one bag each, leave their apartment, and take a 10-minute walk. Here's their residence. They took a 10-minute walk to Klein Sparrow Gasse, which was one of 4 deportation sites that were set up in Vienna. Groups of 1,000 people at a time. They were deported out of the country to the various concentration camps, and a total of 66,000 were processed through these 4 deportation centers. On Tuesday, July 28th, it was Herman and Elizabeth's turn to take the train, so the bags were packed in a car like this, and they were taken down to the train station in Vienna called the Ostbahnhof, and on transport number 34, I think there were a total of 55 transports during the war. So on transport 34 with 998 passengers, they started their journey to Teresian ghetto in Czechoslovakia. So on Tuesday, they went on. The train started. It was a 5-hour train ride, and in October of 1941, Hitler had taken a gingerbread town in the Czech Republic, moved out the residents, and turned it over to the Jews. His purpose was to provide a spa and environment for rich artistic Jews, with only 17,000 inhabitants. That was 1941. When Herman and Elizabeth arrived in 1942, there were 70,000 people living in the town, and it was far from a spa environment. 141,000 were incarcerated in Theresienstadt from 1941 to 1945. 88,000 of them used that as a stopping place to go to Treblinka and Auschwitz to be killed. 33,000 of the ghetto died chiefly from illness and malnutrition. Herman and Elizabeth were 2 of those 33,000 that died there. Back in the United States, my father was promoted on August 13, 1942. It seemed to be a habit of promoted, demoted, promoted, and on December 18, 1942, my father received his certificate of naturalization. He was now a U.S. citizen. He probably noticed all of this was going on. He really hadn't done much for the first 2 years of the service, and probably was related to the fact that there was still talk of enemy spies. So here's a poster that was posted by Seagram's Distillers. It was put in all the bars in Canada and the United States, warning the public to watch out for, don't talk too loudly because you might have a spy next to you. And then there's even more talk of spies, more posters posted around the United States, warning the American public about spies amongst them. February 25th, 1943, my father was demoted. So it was probably all related to the fact that they didn't really know where he would be going. So because of this, he applied probably to this called the Military Intelligence Training Center in Camp Ritchie. Camp Ritchie was opened in 1942 to train soldiers to interrogate, translate, and interpret German war documents. The Americans were having a hard time during the first few months of the war. They would capture German soldiers and documents, and they couldn't read them, and they couldn't talk to the German soldiers. So they decided that the first 2,000 trainees at Camp Ritchie were 2,000 Jewish, German, and Austrian refugees that came to Ellis Island. Somehow my father found out about that, and so he applied. So on May 19, 1943, he started his training at Camp Ritchie in Maryland, which was 19 miles from Gettysburg College. There they learned translation and interrogation. They actually simulated what life would be like in Germany, Italy, and France at the time. They built fake villages so that they get used to what buildings look like. And then they also did role playing. They pretended to interrogate German soldiers, and they also brought in weapons that were captured early in the war, and they brought them to Camp Ritchie so they were familiar with the weaponry of the German army. August 18, 1943, my father graduated from the 9th course of POW interrogation. On September 23, 1943, he completed a special course in order of battle. On November 12, 1943, my father received probably his first real promotion, and he became sergeant. Here are his papers from Camp Ritchie. And then they were issued dog tags. Notice this little initial down here. Back then, you had to put your religion on your dog tag. So they didn't know what religion you were, so when they buried you, they used the proper rites. H for Hebrew would be a P for Protestant. Here my father had been baptized, and he was able to put a C for Catholic. November 23rd, 1943, my father went to Hampton Roads in Newport News, Virginia, and was embarked to go to overseas to be stationed in Algiers, North Africa. He left on a Liberty ship called the SS John Vanguard, which was one of 2,700 Liberty ships built during World War II. The Liberty ships were designed under the care of Roosevelt, and they were built by the mile, chopped off by the yard. They were built in sections all around the United States, sent to the shipyards, and assembled. In 1943, they were putting out 3 ships a day. My father arrived in Algiers, North Africa, on December 23rd, 1943. This was the headquarters of the Allied forces, and under the direction of General Eisenhower. From this headquarters, the invasion of Sicily took place on July 10th, 1943. When my father arrived, they were planning their next invasion. It was called Operation Shingle. The Germans had fortified themselves along a line called the Gustav Line, and this was to basically try to bring soldiers from both sides of the line to fight them. The Gustav Line was called that by the Germans because it was a string of pearls anchored by Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino was on top of a mountain, and that's where the Germans could see every road and river crossing completely around them. And that made it very difficult for the Americans to win that battle. Saturday, January 22nd, my father took off from the same ship, the SS John Vanguard, and landed at Anzio Beach, which was called Operation Shingle D-Day. There were about 5 or 6 D-Days during the war. This was the first D-Day. The D in D-Day stands for day. It was top secret, so they never put the date there. So that's how the name D-Day started. So they arrived, 50,000 troops arrived on the beaches in Anzio, and it started a very bloody war because it was very difficult to take this Abbey of Monte Cassino. During the 5 months that it took in order to break through the Gustav Line and capture the casino, 50,000 Allied deaths and wounded. It was one of the bloodiest time periods during the war. This is a letter that my father sent to his sister Hedda. If you read the letter, it basically is a little bit about nothing. It was a lot about nothing, and probably because there's a censor stamp at the top left. If he hadn't written anything about the war, saying what had happened, the letter never would have been sent. On May 19th, they finally broke through the Gustav Line, and the Germans headed north and east. This was important because of General Clark. He wanted to ensure the Americans, not the British, took Rome. So when he saw that the Germans were going north and east, he made a decision that he would go north and west and capture Rome before the British. As the Germans were withdrawing, General Clark decided to head toward Rome. The rest of the soldiers were fighting on what was called the Caesar Line. This was General Clark had done this against the wishes of General Alexander because Clark viewed the liberation of Rome was secondary, and Clark decided to go against that and go toward Rome. So on June 4th, General Clark and the 5th Army entered Rome with very little opposition because the Germans and Americans were fighting on the Caesar Line. On June 5th, I found a picture of my father walking the streets of Rome on Liberation Day. Again, this is the day before Normandy, so it was important that General Clark wanted to be in the papers before news about Normandy. So basically it says that General Clark wanted Rome for the Americans, and above all, he wanted it for himself. June 11th, my father was transferred to the 4th Corps, which was a specialized group in the 5th Army to move ahead of the troops as they moved their final leg toward the north of Italy. The last area that the Germans had fortified was called the Gothic Line in the Apennine Mountains, and that's where the 5th Army and the 4th Corps started heading. It was a very difficult place. It was in the mountains, and winter was starting, so it was very cold. So they were already starting in the fall and early winter. They were having a difficult time navigating that area. On December 23rd, my father received another promotion to sergeant. And then General Clark decided that it was impossible to go through the mountains in the winter. So he decided to let all of his troops rest for 3 or 4 months and get stronger and fortified, and then move on. And so they stayed in a town called Lucia, and here's a officer's card that my father had in order to get into the officer's canteen. On February 9th, 1945, my father requested his name changed from Goldweiler to Godard. He knew that he probably would be going to be part of the occupation forces at the end of the war, so that he was afraid that if he were captured, he would be killed by the Germans. So he applied for a name change. So the spring offensive through the Gothic Line was ready to happen. It started on April 5th, and it was very easy for the Americans now to walk through the Germans. They were completely demoralized. They were ready to give up. They had no more ammunition. They were ready to surrender. So my father was asked, he was ordered to actually go and arrest Benito Mussolini. However, though, the Italian partisans had already decided that they would take it upon their hands and do them justice. So they captured Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, killed them, and they were hanging in the plaza in Milan as the 5th Army troops came in during April 1945. In 1 year, the troops walked or drove 835 miles. It took them a year to go that distance. On April 29th, my father accepted the surrender of General Penzel, who was head of the Ligurian Army, which basically was the Italian army under Hitler. After interrogating him, we had a conversation here. I'm not sure exactly what it was all about, but it seemed to be laughing about something. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide, knowing that the war was over, and he did not want to suffer what he saw some of his other officers going through. However, a lot of the German officers decided to push the war along and keep it going. However, the Americans basically said, if you go ahead, but we're going to let the Italian partisans and the partisans of the other countries take it upon their hands, and they'll take care of it. If you surrender to us peacefully, we'll give you a fair trial, and we'll keep you safe. So on April 30th, 1945, Commander Colonel Ralph, who headed the Gestapo forward in Italy, his headquarters were in the Regina Hotel in Milan. He took the option of surrendering peacefully. My father and one other sergeant went into the Hotel Regina past 300 partisan standing outside. They wanted to lynch Colonel Ralph, and my father accepted his surrender and took away his gun. And then here's my father, and here's Colonel Ralph. All these are Germans, so basically my father was safe because the Germans knew that if they didn't go safely, quietly with Americans, they would be taken care of by the partisans that were standing outside. They're put into trucks and cars and buses and whisked away to POW camps. Colonel Ralph was infamous, I hate to say, but he had a reputation for utter ruthlessness and was the most feared SS officer in automobility. With the help of his technicians, he invented a mobile gas chamber that Colonel Ralph was personally responsible for killing 300,000 Jews during the war. Here's the official letter, notification from the U.S. government regarding the arrest of Colonel Ralph by my father. May 2nd, 1945 was a ceasefire in Italy. There were 602 days of combat and 312,000 casualties. Italy was by far the worst area of the war as far as death and casualties. On the 8th of May, this was the official day that the German troops laid down their arms and the war in Europe was officially over. May 19th, my father received the Bronze Star for his arrest of Colonel Ralph, and this were my father with his 4 corps officers. My father took a couple months of relaxation in Milan before his next orders came in. These are pictures that he took while in Milan. And on June 2nd, my father received his orders and promotion. Basically, he was going to be part of the occupation forces. Going into Austria to root out a lot of German soldiers that were there still fighting the war. So July 9th, 1945, my father arrived in Austria, Vienna. Austria was divided up into 4 sections. Russia, United Kingdom, France, and the United States divided up the country in 4 sections. And Vienna every month was changed. Each country took turns in Vienna. These are the 4 different zones. And this is Vienna before the war. You saw some of these pictures. And this is in August 1945, pictures that my father took when he arrived in Vienna. So there he was in Vienna, full circle. We have some more pictures. And this is the Vienna Opera House, August 1945. On August 6th and August 9th, we bombed the atomic bombs and bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And on August 15th, the Japanese surrender. However, the official surrender occurred on the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. I knew my father stayed another couple of weeks in Austria because I found an accident report they filed. He witnessed a Jeep accident where one of his fellow soldiers was killed and the other one wounded, and he had to help them, and he had to file an accident report. He arrived back in the United States probably around October 18th, and this were his separation papers, and he was basically separated as an order of battle specialist. November 26th, my father finally received the name change from Chris Francis Goldweiler to Chris Francis Goldweiler. During the next year, he dated my mother, and on November 9th, 1946, he married Suzanne Dottie. On June 3rd, 1947, my sister Jill was born. They moved into a brand new apartment complex in New York City called Stuyvesant Town, or Stuytown. The complex's first tenants were 2 World War II veterans and their families that moved in there. Perhaps my parents were one of those first World War II veterans. My father immediately took a job with a toy company, a German toy company, and was sent over to Germany right away to import German toys. I can't imagine what my father was feeling going back to Germany such a short time after the war. He never talked about it, but I can't imagine it was a super pleasant experience. On April 27th, 1951, I was born. That created a dilemma for my family because they didn't have room in Stuyvesant Village apartment, so they decided to move to the country. They had friends, they met somebody in Ridgewood, I think, and so they fell in love with the town. So Ridgewood was the place they wanted to live. The problem with Ridgewood was, and this is a brochure that was put out by the real estate board back in the 1940s. And in this brochure, the wording's kind of funny, but it's a word that's never used anymore, but it described Ridgewood as a home-like, 100% American community. Ridgewood is a church-going community. So, and also it was a restrictive community by law. Ridgewood had the Ridgewood Code. The code essentially said that homes will only be sold to white Christians. This code was in effect until April 6, 1945, when it was rescinded. And here's the letter that it was rescinded. So, when my parents decided to move, made the decision to move to Ridgewood in 1951, the Smith Act of 1940, the fifth column, the classification of German Jewish refugees as enemy aliens, and the original Ridgewood Code were still probably fresh in the residents' mind, as it was only 6 years earlier. So my parents, they bought a house on Northern Parkway. They joined the Christ Episcopal Church in town. And from that day on, they decided that they were not going to tell their children about any of their background. They were not going to tell them about the Jewish, they were both Jews. They were going to raise them as Christians, and that was going to be the story that they wanted their children to live with for the rest of their life. In the late 1950s, my parents moved to a new home in another part of Ridgewood, and those are my two brothers that were born and forced my parents to find a larger house to live in. They were there with our grandmother, Missy Goldwhiter, and fast forward about 1970, I just finished my first year of college. And I came back and I was going through some papers in my family study, and I realized not only were my parents first cousins, but they were both Jewish. This was a very disturbing moment for me. Growing up in an environment in Ridgewood that many times was prejudiced, I realized I had been a victim without knowing it. I also wondered why I was asked by my friends and classmates if I were Jewish. They told me it was my Jewish nose. Of course, I responded that it was an Austrian nose, and I was an Episcopalian. Don't look too closely because you might be disappointed because my nose was fixed. And one big takeaway for me from that moment were the days many of us were waiting outside the cafeteria after lunch, waiting for the bell to ring. A few of my classmates, probably frequently the same ones, took pennies from their pockets and threw them down the hall to where the principal's office is, right down the hall, questioning out loud how many Jews would come out and pick them up, not knowing at the time that in fact it was directed at me. Most of us were bystanders. But were passive participants in our classmates' unkind acts. Safety in numbers allowed us to choose to be weak, to watch and not respond. I, in effect, was a victim of my own prejudice by being passive. Hopefully all of you can learn to be bystanders that promote values and norms of caring and choose to be strong, standing up or walking away as a group, making the perpetrator the weak one. I have learned a great deal by writing my story and hope you enjoy hearing it. And that is it. All set.
All right, let's give him one more big round of applause. Alright, so we are out of time for a Q&A, but if you have a free next period or you want to stick around for a couple minutes, Dr. Godard has agreed to hang out and answer any questions. Otherwise, the bell is about to ring, and we'll dismiss, let's dismiss the first 5 or so rows first.